I took the October ACT. This video is the walkthrough of the English section to better prepare for your next ACT exam. And make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you get notified whenever these new videos come in your feed.
So starting with a passage 1, we will be going through these questions, kind of getting insight. But one of the best ways to tackle this is to make sure you pause and attempt to answer these questions on your own, and then play the video to confirm if you're correct or incorrect. Okay, so number 1, as centuries grew, in the 19th and 20th centuries, thousands of urban streams were diverted underground. So you've got a lot of commas going on, and most time you don't need that many commas. So if you kept these 2 commas, then based on the 2 comma rule, this would be considered extra fluff or non-essential information. You can also test commas by if you need a bunch of breaths. So on number 1, the answer is going to be simply B. You do not need any commas to break that up. Another sneaky thing they also have hidden right here, and we're going to talk more about it later, is they have this comma and, which is a fanboys, which, by the way, is the same as a period. Okay, so with number 2, which choice most effectively maintains these essays' tone? So the way you approach these tone questions is really, really simple. Is you pretty much need to go with the whole style of the essay. And typically you can eliminate 1 or 2 right off the bat. So one you can always eliminate is the one that sounds like they are trying to shove too many words in there. And this first bad answer is going to be G. It says, to curtail the predicaments referenced above, communities may want to contemplate investing. No one really writes like that. So G is a little bit obnoxious. So let's eliminate that one. And then also on number 2, then you're kind of just seeing which one's going to be the best fit. If you look at J, it says one surefire way to remedy the culverting mess. That's not a good option. Let's eliminate J. Then with H, but there's a conceivable fix if communities would only just invest their monetary assets, or F, to alleviate these issues, communities should invest in. So the one that flows so much better with the whole passage is going to be F. It also sounds a lot less clunky. So for number 3, if the essay or if the writer were to delete the preceding sentence, which, by the way, preceding is something that a lot of people miss. All it means is before. The essay would primarily lose information that what? So let's look at which sentence they're highlighting, which right here, thus daylighting reduces flooding by allowing more rainwater to be absorbed where it falls. So what we are talking about here is more or less what is the benefits, or I guess you could say cons also, of daylighting. So it kind of goes into context. Daylighting projects remove impermeable barriers such as concrete between waterways and soil. Thus, daylighting reduces flooding by allowing more rainwater to be absorbed where it falls. So what they're really highlighting on is a benefit of daylighting in this regard. So if you look at the option, you have to focus on the benefits. So if you look at D, explains the impact of rainwater on daylighting projects. I wouldn't really say that's focused on a benefit, so I'd eliminate D. C, describes the process through which soil absorbs. That is a bunch of random and not focused on it. It's actually trying to trick you into this sentence. So C is gone. B, provides data on the effects of removing barriers between waterways and soil. That is not at all answered. So this one is going to be A, articulates one advantage of removing barriers between waterway and soil. This is focusing on like pretty much the benefits. So 3 is going to be A. The number 4, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? I like to refer to this one as like odd duck out. And I was actually highlighting this with our school group, which, by the way, you can find linked in the bio. And what we kind of were talking about is, you see how these right here, streams that, streams these, streams which, and then you just have streams. 99% of the time, it's going to be the one that kind of stands alone by itself. And then we'll also look at the grammar in this in just a second. So off the top, just by being an odd man out, the answer is going to be J. But if you kind of look at it from, well, a couple of different ways, but the main thing that I'm seeing is that these are trying to separate into more independent clauses. So that's why you would lean on J. And then number 5, given that all choices are accurate, which one provides the most relevant support for the primary claim in the sentence? So of course you have to focus on what's the claim. So let's go ahead and tackle that. And one thing that you're going to notice that I do is I always focus on what the question is saying first. Sometimes, like if I'm actively taking the test, and I'll like skim and then go to the questions, but I do really focus on what the question's asking. So if we look at 5, it kind of as a whole says, and daylighting saves cities money. So I'm seeing money in other ways too. Open creeks are much cheaper to maintain than culverts are, and daylighting projects have less than flooding in cities across the United States. So a lot of this is focused on money. Which one provides the most relevant support for the primary claim? So we are going to focus on money in this context. So then you look through the options on 5. The one I'm seeing with B has cost, so that's a good sign. That one's not talking about money. D is not talking about money, it's talking about wildlife. And then A does not talk about money as well. So 5 is just going to be B. Okay, number 6, at this point in the essay, the writer wants to introduce a counterclaim, which, by the way, a counterclaim is like an opposing view. View that an opponent of daylighting might reasonably assert which choice most effectively accomplished this goal. So you're looking for the opposite. So 6 says early attempts at culverting required innovative construction techniques. So that's what they're highlighting. But this one you want to provide as a counterclaim, someone who's opposed to the daylighting. So going through these options, you've got F, early attempts at culverting required innovative construction techniques. I don't know if that one is just not that good at arguing against. G, certain daylighting projects tear down abandoned walls, warehouses before adding bridges. That's not really focused on true like negatives. Besides, I mean, you can imply it, but not fully. H, many citizens have lived and worked above their city streams. That one is just completely random. And then J, a downside of daylighting is the loss of some usable structures. You really focus on the hardcore negative here, and J is where it's at. Then number 7, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? So here is my dumb hack. And I say 99% of the time just because, just in case. But 99% of the time, whom is not the answer. So let's go ahead and eliminate those. People like to choose it though, so I like to talk about that. So on number 7, we're going to the effect and the affect, and we have to figure out which one is going to be the best. So on number 7, this one, you're going to want the direct affect. So the answer is going to be D. But if you look at it in context, it says, therefore, city officials need to plan daylighting projects in careful collaboration with residents and business owners who may be affected. So I typically see there's a few different ways to use it, but I typically see affect when you're talking about humans and people, and that is kind of an easy way to remember. So one of the other reasons why the answer at 7 is D. So on number 8, which one's the clearest and most precise in context, which is a fancy way of saying which one fits the sentence. On number 8, so thoughtfully plan daylighting embellishes the quality of life. So embellishing is kind of like making up or faking it, like my 4-year-old's really good about doing. And then you have refurbishes, which is changes. Enriches means like grows, and fortifies is like a fort. And if you're ever stuck on this vocab, just think about like what word it sounds like. And this one is really just standing out with fort there. So on number 8, you've got to figure out what's going on. So thoughtfully plan daylighting embellishes or faking the quality of life. That one over. Eliminate. Refurbishes would be changes the quality of life of the community as a whole, creating green spaces. So you can kind of argue about refurbishes, but there's a more positive. So enriches is more positive. So the answer on 8 is going to be H. So number 9, which choice provides the most effective conclusion for the paragraph and essay? So pretty much which one makes the best conclusion sentence, in all honesty. So number 9, you kind of eliminate the weird one. So 9 is citizens far and wide should oppose future culverting initiatives. That one's random. No, that's not backed up. So let's eliminate A. Then B is in the last 20 years, cities worldwide have contemplated daylighting various streams. I would say maybe on that one. It's not the worst. Then C, daylighting offers more than a view of waterway. It brings life back to the city center. Bingo. That is a great conclusion. So if you look at it compared to B and even D, it's just, that's a stronger conclusion. It's tying in more of the essay. So then lastly, on number 10, and a lot of students do not like these, to be honest, you pretty much have to figure out where you would add this. And what I'm seeing is I kind of focus on the key things. I'm seeing money. If it happened sooner, the project might have saved 70 million more in flood damage that occurred in 1999 to 2011. So I'm mostly focused on money and numbers. Where is this going to make sense? And I find it easier to kind of backtrack because you're closer to the end of the passage here. So if we check on number 10, if we look for J, it says point D in paragraph 4. So here's paragraph 4. Here's point D right here. Let's see. And then let's see, can we add a number in this aspect? And it's talking about saving money and flood damage. No, we cannot, because that's just talking about the benefits. So then if we go to H on number 10, which is going to be point C in paragraph 3. So this is talking a lot about numbers and money. And honestly, without back looking, this is going to be the perfect fit and also validated by the key. The answer at number 10 is H. So for passage number 2, this is when, honestly, they start getting random with their passages. And in theory, it should get harder as it goes on. So what I typically recommend is you read kind of the beginning, at least get a gist, and then you go to the question. But these ones are my favorite. So least redundant just means less wordy. I always feel like these are kind of free. If you are ever stuck on these and overthinking it, just choose the one with the least amount of words, worst case scenario. But you look at the one that's less fluffy. So A is a few annoyingly irritating calls with my sister, 2-1. Then B, aggravating calls with my sister that make me long to throw my phone. That's really wordy. C is some frustrating calls with my sister on the phone. And then D is certain exasperating calls with my sister. And 11 is simply the one with the less words is D. Then which choice is the clearest and most concise? So pretty much the best vocab word. So kind of going on by according to A, this competition wasn't inspired by annoying siblings. It was as certain as an engaging reminder for friends to dispose of their mobile phones responsibly. So we have to go a certain, speculated, conceived, or suppose. So on number 12, a certain means like kind of that you tie it to. Conceived means like make or create most of the time. And then suppose is like assume, and speculated, most people know what speculated means, but it's kind of like making assumptions as well. So we got to figure out which one's going to fit best in context for number 12. And then on number 12, it was blank as engaging reminder for friends to dispose of their mobile phones responsibly. So it was kind of made as an engaging reminder. So made is the closest to conceived. So it would be H. And honestly, on the October ACT, I found that the vocab was a little bit harder than it's been in the past, which is kind of interesting. So number 13, which one most effectively maintains the essay's tone? They love these questions. So let's eliminate first the really ridiculous fluffy one. So if we look for the fluffy one on number 13, in pursuit of the phone with which an elongated lob could most likely be achieved. Like, that's cheesy. No one's writing like that. So eliminate B. And then C, seeking the phone with a structural configuration most suited to be flung afar. Like, kind of have Shakespeare-esque. So let's eliminate that one. And then You've got D, keeping their eyes peeled for the phone that might take to the skies with gusto. It's a little silly. And then the other option for 13 is searching for the phone with the greatest flight potential. The one that is simpler, goes with the flow, is going to be A. Hopefully you're starting to feel a little bit better about these tone questions. If you can, leave me a comment how you feel about the tone questions, if you find them easy, hard. I find them easier than the others, but everybody's got kind of a different viewpoint there. So in number 14, this one, which one creates the clearest contrast, which means like comparison between the atmosphere at this event and the fierce rivalry the narrator expected to see. So you're looking for a clear contrast that fits in this scenario. So you really have to hyper pay attention on number 14. So as we entered the venue, athletes and spectators of all ages milled around us. I found the lively, agitated atmosphere with no trace of fierce rivalry I often saw at competitive events to be a pleasant surprise. So when you first see number 14, you're like, oh, like if you look at the first option with 14, like that's kind of opposite, happy and then agitated, but you've got to really focus on what better fits the context in the scenario. So it's actually not F. And then for 14, you've got dignified and focused, festive and cordial, intense and wary. So as we entered the venue, everybody milled around us. I found a lively, where no trace of fierce rivalry. I also saw commitments to pleasant surprise. Some attendees showed off their zany costumes. Most people wore casual, everyday clothes. However, the only telltale sign of those competing were paper bid, number, pen to the athlete shirt. So honestly, it sounds like a really like fun, like you have to get the whole tone from this so that you have like a fun atmosphere. There is like people are nice to each other. There's not like a huge bunch of fighting. So wary is like tired. So I would eliminate J. And then dignified, focus, like themed, zany. No, focus is not happening. So the answer on 14 is H. And the number 15, which transition word is most logical in this context? So you've got a few options. A lot of people like the one, however, but to be honest, that one is actually not correct. So if you look at it in whole, however, the only telltale sign of who was competing were the paper bib numbers pinned to the athlete shirts. So you've got eventually, you would remove, besides would be kind of a jab or like a random statement, and that does not fit. However, and then in fact. So in fact is a better option in the scenario because it's kind of adding on in fact instead of like a however, instead of combining, like providing a contrast. This one you probably could debate between A and D pretty closely, but the answer on 15 is D. So 16, if the writer were to delete the underlined portion, the essay would primarily lose a specific detail that. So it says the crowd cheered as a woman rode a unicycle in a circle for a full 45 seconds before lofting her phone to the sky. So when I first saw this, I'm like, 45 seconds doesn't sound that long. But I guess as I read it more, honestly, on test day, I was like, I guess that could be impressive. So that actually threw me off pretty badly on test day. And maybe I'm not the only one there before lofting her phone to the sky. So what they're focused on in 16 is why it is so special. So 16, if you go to F, helps clarify that the woman on the unicycle was the most impressive contestant. That one is random. And it's not really comparing her to other contestants. So that would be F. And then G helps illustrate why women's performance was particularly noteworthy. That one's pretty good. H defines the minimum required length of the performances in the event. That one's random. Nope. Reveals why the woman chose to ride a unicycle before throwing her phone. That no, not at all. So the best answer on this one and the correct one is G. Number 17, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable in this scenario? So people kind of land on two sides of a coin with this. Sometimes they always choose the delete, and that's not always right, or they always choose no change. So let's go ahead and go into this. So we stopped to watch the freestyle event, which is judged more on the creativity of the throws than on the distance. So if we remove this, it says which is judged on the creativity of the throws than on the distance. So you have a comparison going on 17. So you actually do not want to delete D because it is kind of actually clunky without it, or delete that one on more. And then which is judged at least as much on creativity of the throws than on distance, or you can go primarily on the creativity than on distance. So primarily would not quite suit it as much in this context on number 17, at least as much. You typically don't want to add extra words in general. So this one, the better answer is more. On number 18, which sequence of sentences makes this paragraph most logical? So you have to figure out, I think it's easier to figure out which one is the better starter. So if we look at this paragraph, we've got a few things going on. So we've got sentence 1, sentence 2, and sentence 3. So look, everyone, even competitors in the original category who are generally trying for the farthest throw, seem to be having fun. Spectators didn't talk on their phones, they talked to each other. Following their lead, I turned my phone off. So looking at this one, I actually like this third sentence right here to start off. So if we go, following their lead, I turned my phone off. And then that would leave us with H and J. So you've got either sentence 1 or sentence 2. So if you go sentence 1, following their lead, I turned my phone off. Everyone, even competitors in the original category, were generally trying for the farthest throw. Spectators didn't talk on their phones. They talked to each other. So this one is actually like a really confusing passage. But this one right here is going to be H. The way they have it going is they kind of have their like catch attention statement, and then they go into like more detail, and then they close it. So that's why they're going for that flow. But this one is actually like just a really, really tricky problem here. So that being said, on number 19, and we're almost done with this particular passage, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? So this semicolon right here, and I've talked about this before, a semicolon is the same as a period. So that's how we have to test it. So 19, what we first do is we got to figure out if we put a period there. Spectators didn't talk on their phones. They talked to each other. So you can put a period there. So you have to stop the roll then and then go 19 for A. The number 20, which of the following sentences, if added here, were most effectively suggest that as this moment, the narrator intends to connect with others in person rather than engaging with the phone. So on number 20, you're focused on in person rather than engaging with the phone. So after all, I had taken enough pictures and video to remember the experience for years to come. It's not really talking about talking to people in person. And then G, then I linked arms with Anelli and stepped further into the crowd. That one is talking about engaging. So maybe. H, at the moment, I stopped hoping that I could come again next year. That one's not really talking about engaging. J, I still feel in my pocket, but I ignored it mostly. And that's why this one's wrong. So the answer on this one is G. Okay, so for passage 3, we are going to be transitioning into a little bit harder material. The English definitely gets a little bit harder as it goes on. So, okay, so we are starting with number 21 on passage 3. Typically, I recommend kind of just skimming as you go through here and then kind of landing and finishing the sentence where number 21 is. So looking at number 21, well, actually, just to backstep a little bit, kind of in summary, it talks about an artist and where they grew up. It talks about he and his people planted and harvested the crops during consecutive waiting moons, just as our ancestors had in centuries past. Interconnectedness eventually became the central theme of his art. So yes, it's about an artist, history, and tying closer to cultural context. So now going to number 21, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? And one thing you need to remember is these comma ands many times, that's going to be the same as a period. So I always test the strongest punctuation first, which for me is going to be B. So let's see if on 21 B makes sense. So interconnectedness eventually became the central theme of Taurus's art in 2016. Yeah, I could put a period there, but let's keep going. So if we go, his sunlight series, with his Sunlight series, he paid homage to the people in place that first inspired him. Okay, so since I can put a period where B is, or where this choice B is, or this comma and, the answer is going to be B. And you're probably wondering like why I'm not going back and testing all the other stuff. For what I have found the most effective and the quickest is if that first punctuation works, then we need to go ahead and land on that one. Okay, so for number 22, if the writer were to delete the underlined portion, adjusting the punctuation as needed, the paragraph would primarily lose what? So let's go ahead and look at this. So we've got this underlined portion. What a lot of students do wrong is that they don't go back and focus on the rest of the context because they only focus on the underlined portion, but actually the answer is normally in the context. So looking at this one here, it talks about Torres created 16 oil portraits for friends and family from B, starting and completing each portrait in the same lunar phase in which the village residents farm. So what I'm seeing here is there's tying a lot about to his people and centuries and farming. So we're going to keep that in mind as I go through these answers. So as I'm starting with F, a detail illustrating how Torres's approach to creating the Sunlight series was influenced by his personal and cultural history. Oh, it doesn't sound bad, so we'll go back to that. I put a little mark when I'm like, maybe that's good. G is an example clarifying how Torres depicted various types of moonlight in the paintings in his sun. So it is referring back on 22 to like what they're talking about, but it's not really clarifying the types of moonlight. So we'll eliminate G. Because a lot of it's talking a little bit about culture, villas and its residents. But yes, it's talking about the lunar phase, but there's a little bit more sentimental value to it. And then H, a suggestion that Torres often finds inspiration for his art from a connection with friends and family. This one's not really talking. I mean, it does talk about his friends and family, but this is starting in the lunar phase cycle right here. And then with his Sunlight series, he paid homage. That's not really tying into the whole thing. So I would eliminate H. And then J, a description of Torres's upbringing and cultural traditions that most influence his artistry. This one is just talking about one art painting. So I would eliminate that. And the best answer, and you might be able to argue, be like, okay, maybe that other answer is okay. But honestly, the best answer is F, and that is validated also by the key. So number 23, which makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? My gut instinct with these, and maybe it's just from seeing them a lot, is less commas is normally better. Not always right, but normally better. So that's something we're going to keep in mind in this scenario, but it doesn't mean that that's going to be the correct answer. So to visually represent interconnectedness, Torres painted the portraits in his signature woven style. So there's a lot going on here. So you have a dash, and then you have a comma, and 99% of the time, if it's got a dash and a comma and like the same thing, that's gone. Such as doesn't make any sense. B is portraits in his signature. So if you have two commas, that means you would remove that and read it without it. So Torres painted the portraits, woven style, which don't love that. So you don't need these two commas here. You could also think of like just taking a breath each time, which would be really obnoxious. So let's eliminate B. And then C is portraits in his signature, which flows pretty nicely. That one's a solid one. And then C, portraits in his signature woven style. So there's still a lot of breaking up. And the answer on this one is C, because people will see this, we're like, oh, we need commas and punctuation, but not always. When in doubt, less commas is normally the better option. For number 24, which choice provides the most specific description of the appearance of strands composing the faces in Torres's portraits? So when I took this test in October, this one kind of threw me through a loop. So what they're hyper focusing on is just kind of a couple of details. One is going to be the appearance of strand, and then the most specific. So here's your main thing, most specific description. So let's see what's most specific. So you've got assemble to, combine in such a way that precisely interlace to, artistically used to. So the most descriptive option out of all these, and they are very similar, to be honest, which is why it kind of threw me when I first, took this in October. But the answer is going to be H, because it is the most specific description. And then number 25, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? So as I'm previewing these, before I get too deep into it, one thing I'm noticing is comma which, comma who. And that's kind of one of those like repetitive things you typically don't want. But let's set it in context. So to achieve this effect, Taurus worked from photographs to draw realistic renderings of his subjects directly onto giant canvases. That's a pretty good option there. So A is in the running. So let's go ahead and eliminate. So Taurus, and then which would draw, and then who drew. That one's just adding like kind of an extra subject, and that's going to completely change the meaning of the sentence. So we're going to remove that. And then photographs that drew. But since he's the one who's working on it and drawing, this one you want to go to draw. Those are one of those unique ones where you can kind of go with what actually sounds better, ironically. Okay, so on number 26, which transition word is most logical in context? And for transition words, you need to read a little bit below and a little bit above. So let's go ahead and scroll back up. So if we look at this, it says, kind of starting, to visually represent interconnected, Taurus painted the portraits in a signature woven style. The portraits appear as though they're made from strands of hemp or jute that have been assembled to form lifelike faces. To achieve this effect, Taurus worked from photographs to draw realistic renderings of his subjects directly onto giant canvases in his studio in Atlanta, Georgia. Blank, he applied thousands of thin fiber-like dabs of paint, mostly whites, grays, and blacks, to give the multi-layered portraits the appearance of being rough and woven. So for instance would be like a very specific example, but this is kind of a step. So it's pretty much talking about he drew the subjects and then blank applied thousands of, so like this is step one and this is step two. So for instance is a bad, a consequently is not even make sense. Again, there's no again, and the answer on this one is then. 27, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? So going through 27, you've just got a lot going on, to be honest. So on 27, just looking at the options before we get too deep in it, we've got 2 dashes, which means that you would remove that on A. B is we've got also 2 dashes. 27C is commas and parentheses, and most of the time those don't typically go next to each other. And then D is that dash and comma, which I gave you a warning that that's almost always wrong. And a lot of the ACT English, what makes things a lot easier is just to focus on the pattern. So let's go ahead and eliminate D. And then for also, we've got on 27, if we look at C, if you've got like a comma and the parentheses, you're double adding punctuation you don't need. So we'll eliminate C. And then you wrote between A and B. So paint mostly whites, grays, and blacks. And then this one's mostly whites, grays, and blacks. So on this one, you have to figure out where you want the kind of break in the sentence to be. So do you want it to include mostly in the dash, or do you not? So this is how I would test it. So he applied thousands of thin fiber-like dabs of paint mostly, and we're going to not read that sentence, to give. So if you just leave mostly right here, that's a terrible spot for it. You want it to be combined inside. So the answer on this one is B. Okay, so in 28, which choice is the clearest and most precise in context, which pretty just means what actually makes sense in the sentence? And at first when I saw this, I was like, oh, fanboys. And I was like eliminating the options. And that's not what you need to focus on in 28. You need to focus on just actually the most best logical option. So in sunlight, Mario, an older man's skin possesses a checkered texture, so the salt pepper hairs of his handlebar mustache appear sharp and wiry. You've got since, you've got and you've got for. So possess a checkered texture. So you've got to figure out what is going on and like kind of just break the sentence down. So we're talking about Mario. I talk about his older skin and what's kind of happening to the hairs of his mustache. So typically, so let's check so and since. So if you look at this in kind of context, is it's talking about skin, and then it's like because of his skin, then the hairs in his middle, like his mustache appear sharp and wiry. That's not the case at all. That's just not true. So you would actually eliminate F because that does not make sense. And then since would also be like, hey, his salt and pepper hairs are because of his skin. So that's why we eliminate G as well. So now we are down to H and J. So looking at H and J, we've got and the salt and pepper hairs of his handlebar mustache, or for the salt and makes so much more logical sense. So the answer on this one is and. Then 29, given that all the choices are actual quotations from Torres, which one most effectively would most effectively conclude the sentence and the essay? So we're talking a lot about art, his process, and I always kind of like remember back to what's actually going on in the passage. It's talking about Torres, each brushstroke or thread is in the work is an integral part of the whole final creation, a reflection of his philosophy, interconnectedness. He likens his artistic process to how his family has for generations cultivated and harvested crops. With my works, it is if I am planting an idea and working with universal laws in the realization. So we got to figure out like which is going to literally just conclude and tie this essay together. So on number 29, we're talking about planting. It's talking about working with universal laws and realization. That one's not bad because it's talking about planting and arts. And then let's look at B. Even if it looks like a lot of effort to create my paintings, they're effortless because it is a total joy to make them. This one is not about the joy because it's more, I would eliminate B because a lot of that's about joy, and this passage is more about like kind of just tying in philosophy. Most Cuban population is made up of farmers who plant and harvest their crops on the waning moon. That is a terrible way to end an essay, and C is incorrect on 29. And then on 29 for D, I started to paint objects and people made out of natural elements like feathers with that and basket weaving. So if you just look at these, honestly, I find it easier just to kind of focus on like in general what's actually going to conclude the essay best. And you would not conclude the essay in D at all. So the answer is A on this one here. And then number 30, suppose the writer's primary purpose had been to discuss paintings that represent a key theme in an artist's work. Would this essay accomplish this purpose here? So instead of focusing on yes and no, what I typically tell students, I just find it easier in my brain, is really just focus on the logic, and we start eliminating just the stuff that doesn't make sense at all. So if we look at F, so it explains Torres' philosophy that childhood relationships have been the most profound influence on an artist's paintings. That one's not bad, but let's go back to discuss paintings that represent a key theme in an artist's work. So let's look also for that word painting. So let's skim. So portraits, yeah, paintings. So F is not a bad option, so we'll come back to that. And then we kind of whittle it down from there. So G on number 30 is yes, because it explores how Taurus's sunlight series exemplifies his philosophy about interconnectedness. Oh. So this one here is talking about child relationship, and a lot of his essay is talking about interconnectedness. So this one right here is actually a lot better logic. let's look at H and J. So typically if I was going to answer this yes or no, which I try to avoid actually, I would just say like overall yes. And so if I needed to be fast, I would just answer G because it's the better logic and move on. But if you look at these major ideas explored throughout his artistic career, didn't focus on particular artworks, which that's just not valid in the essay. And then although it describes Horace's son portraits in detail, it fails to discuss thematic elements in the series. I don't feel like that's not good logic either. So even just eliminating the logic, the answer will still be G. Okay, so this is the last passage we will go over on the English. And you're like, wait, there was more questions on the tests. And absolutely, you're correct. And I have a note actually at the bottom of this. They eliminate a whole passage when they grade this new enhanced ACT. I don't love that, but that's just what they do. And of course, when they released the test, they did not release the non-graded questions, which kind of stinks, but I guess it is what it is. So that being said, on 31, we're talking about redefining music. Dip hop, a growing subgenre of hip hop, which personally I've never heard of, grounded in deaf culture, well, that would be why, and aesthetics, challenge stereotypes and help to reshape mainstream notions of what music is. Okay, so looking through this, let's kind of break this down. So which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? Are challenging and have helped, challenge stereotypes and are helping, challenges stereotypes and is helping are our options on number 31. So there's just a lot going on. So as we look through here, the way I start looking at it to kind of organize my brain is I see two dashes. So let's go ahead and cross that out because we're not going to test it while reading that in context. So dip hop, challenge stereotypes and help. Oh, see, as I read that out loud, that is awful. So you eliminate A. That's why it's helpful to eliminate stuff. And then honestly, like this is singular. So you need to add an S to challenges to even make sense. So that would eliminate B because the subject is similar or singular, and then C, the subject is singular. So the only answer on this one is D. So you streamline things by eliminating stuff between two dashes because that is what I lovingly call extra fluff. Okay, so on 32, let's one, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? So what this is talking about is I'm kind of looking back. A fundamental style are heavy emphasis on bass beats and lyrics wrapped in sign language, which actually sounds pretty cool. Audiences feel the rhythmic vibration, see the lyrics in motion, and engage sonic imagination. So if you've heard of this, I would love to hear about this in the comments because I personally have not heard of this before. Though rooted in hip hop, dip hop is not simply rap songs translated into ASL, but musical expression from a deaf perspective. Okay, woo, there's quite a bit going on here with number 32. So just kind of looking at these options, though rooted in hip hop. So if you've got this like weird intro here in a comma, that's an introductory clause. You always need the subject, which I will say F has a subject, but looking at the other options, it's not simply rap songs translated in ASL, but musical expression. So first thing I'm seeing to eliminate here is when you've got hip hop dash dip hop. So they are doing an introductory clause. So you do not want a dash right here. And it's also got a dash and a comma. You typically don't want those as answers. Okay, so J on this one for 32 is hip hop, comma, dip hop is not simply rap songs translated in ASL, but musical expression from a deaf perspective. So if you just read that dash like a massive pause, like it's defined, then it doesn't work. So J is gone. And then we've got to delineate between the two. So kind of 9 times out of 10, you want less commas because it would be deleting this. So you would go hip hop. And then because of these 2 commas, you can actually argue that that would be eliminated. So the one that actually makes the most sense and it kind of follows good rules of thumbs is F. So number 33, some collaborate with DJs, deaf or hearing, some induct visual elements, but the induct does not sound good as I read it out loud. like sound activated lights, and some use specialized equipment to enhance vibrations. So I can tell you right off the bat, like it's so cringe to read the word induct, so that's gone. We just have to figure out the best vocab. You got congregate, which typically means like a group of people. Some congregate, some compound, some integrate visual elements. Okay, just integrate. It just sounds way better in context there. That one is even hard to read the bad answers. 34, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? So these are artists who only sign their raps and those who incorporate both oral and sign language to make their music accessible. And if you're able to see this on the screen, I literally have my cat crash in this video. She's a baby. She's about 4 months old. You should let me finish this video, which I'm sure is making a very entertaining YouTube video at this point. I've had her jump out and attack me in a video, which was fun. Okay, so 34. So first of all, my favorite really stupid rule that someone's gonna argue me about is I say 99.9% of the time it is never whom, so I just like eliminate the whom's. Whom, which, so then you've got which only sign their raps and them that. Oh God, that sounds awful. So 34, so if we go, which only sign their raps and them that, I just can't even read that. We're going to eliminate that one. So who only sign their raps and them which, and then there are artists who only sign their raps and those. Okay, just reading it straight out loud, it sounds 20 times better. There's a lot of grammar rules going on in there, but honestly, you want to kind of avoid the whom, the whiches, and them that, and then this is just terrible. So this one is one you can kind of just eliminate by reading and figure out which sounds best. Obviously, you cannot read out loud on the test, but it's a really good skill to be able to like practice reading out loud in your head. So which choice most effectively leads the reader from the preceding, which we talked about, that means before paragraph, to the information that follows in this paragraph. So whenever I see these, I always kind of scroll back up and refresh my brain. So the one before is talking a little bit about what happens, about crafting songs, about including visual elements and enhanced vibrations to make the music more accessible. Okay, so leads from the paragraph before to the information that follows in this paragraph. And in this paragraph, it says, yet many encounter dip hop in 2020. Like I said, I was confused. Dip hop artist Sean Forbes' Little Victories reached #1 in hip hop on iTunes. So that's cool. And then Wawa's Loud was top 20 dance track, and then 2022, and they performed at Super Bowl halftime show, bringing dip hop to the masses. I had no idea. That's actually really cool. Okay, so this is kind of the conclusion of how it is becoming like more public and well known. So if we look at this, but many have yet to encounter dip hop. But then it kind of goes against the rest of it. So I would eliminate A. And this is one of the many styles of rap that have developed over time, but this is going on highlights, so it's not about developing over time. And then dip hop is resonating. I like that one, but each artist is unique. Resonating means, like in this context, means a little bit of growing, or actually a lot of growing. So I would go with C. Okay, and then final little mini passage. Okay, so which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? This one's on Southside Balloon. In Chicago's Inglewood neighborhood, every employee at Southside Balloon's a flower fulfillment center. Remember, we kind of eliminate that. Have embraced. So we have to ask ourselves on 36, what's the subject of the sentence? And that helps us kind of just, or what is that more focusing on? So, because that helps us focus on which pretty much verbs and other words to use in general. So on 36, we've got have embraced, are embracing, embraces, and an embrace. So kind of just going this, every employee at Southside Blooms. So this is a singular because it's talking about one employee. So then you need to have an S. And so the only one that works is H. So on this one, all neighborhood residents, and most of whom, they of course have whom there, but it's not an option, are under the age of 30, arrayed peonies H and tulips into bouquets that are delivered throughout the area. So we have to figure out on 37 which one is going to make the most sense in grammar. And the way I always test like the colons is going to be an independent clause and a dependent clause here. And then let's kind of look through and start testing what's going to make the most sense. So this would be a dash. Ooh. So let's look back up. So we have a dash up here. So if this works, that means we can eliminate all of that. So let's kind of just use a different color and see if that works. So this arranges my brain. So the employees arrange peonies, H, and tulips into bouquets that are delivered throughout the area. Okay, that works. So the answer on this one is B. A lot of times when I see a dash on one side and then there's a dash down below, most of the time that is the answer, to be honest. Patterns is like learning patterns on this test is actually just a huge help, especially if you're not a hardcore grammar snob. For me, I prefer math every day of the week. So it's what's really helped me with the English is just learning these patterns. Okay, and then 38, and you'll also see my big loud reminder here to make sure that I mention it in this video. But which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable? We've got to figure out, do we need commas around Dinetta White? And I'm sorry, I'm probably completely butchering her name. It seems like a cool name, but I need to look it up. So most of the time on the ACT, the SAT as well, is when you have like, I say it as jobs and names, or kind of like the person and what they do and names. And this kind of fits the context. So typically with most of those, you typically do not do any commas, but let's look at the other option. So if you have 2 commas here, then you eliminate her name and G is wrong. Same thing. So member, nope, you won't want to pause there. And then member, Dinetta White. So you have a comma here, and then if you even put a comma there, then you have to eliminate that all, so then that's gone. And then the answer on this one, because you typically don't need commas around people's names, at least on these standardized tests, is going to be F. So on number 39, you're asking which one makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable, and one massive little flag I'm seeing is they have 2 options with semicolons, so likely it's going to be one of those. So semicolons, you kind of just test them to see if they have a period. So let's go ahead and test these. So for White, it's been revelatory. He's learning about eco-friendly methods that he didn't know existed. So honestly, C decently works because we can break those up into 2 sentences. And then it's been revelatory. And then let's check if the other side makes sense. To learn about eco-friendly methods that he didn't know existed. So D, that doesn't work. That's not a sentence. I do really like C. If I was in a pickle, I would actually just choose C and move on. And then for White, it's been revelatory. But if you have B and even A, you're going to be like, with 2 commas, you're going to be removing too much information. So actually, I would just still land on C. And confirming the answer with the key is also C. So number 40, which choice makes the sentence most grammatically acceptable, which is our last one. In 4 years, over 30 Southside Blooms employees have earned stipends that study urban agriculture. That is clunky there. Okay, so employees who have earned stipends too, and you probably see by my facial expression, that's a little clunky too. Employees having earned stipends too. Okay, just H is wrong. There's just a lot going on, and then you're breaking it up. Employees have earned stipends too. Employees have earned stipends too, or employees have study urban. So because that's actually what they're working on, you're going to want 2. And the last one on this one is J.
I hope you found this ACT English video walkthrough helpful. If you need more help and want to better prepare for your ACT exam, I have linked also in the bio and in the comments our live twice-a-week school group with tons of recordings, tons of practice material, and I will be live there twice a week to better support you. I would love to have you join and look forward to seeing you there.